noticing earlier that everyone was down, and after breakfast you came up a little bit. Since this is a roller coaster, this is normal. And there are many things that came up quickly. That means that I'm doing my job better, because normally it takes longer. But it may not be comfortable, but anyway. So I thought, okay, we better do trauma, drama, karma, not too much karma, mostly trauma. And to understand the usefulness of trauma. Because there is something called the narrative. Have you heard about this? The narrative is the ubiquitous lies that are surrounding us, that are provided to us by whoever is benefiting from people believing something to be true which is not true, and believing something to be untrue which is true. So this is the season of the narrative. The narrative is being used rather a lot, which means we need to understand this thing called the narrative. And it is to do with the world we live in. It's basically a world which is becoming very polarized. In order to manage the polarity, this narrative has emerged. And the polarity is to do with this big division between the pairs of opposites. So we have the male-female polarity, we have the north-south polarity, the east-west polarity, the rich-poor polarity, the left politics, right politics polarity, which is actually no longer a polarity because left and right are both on the same side. So it's really the traditional people versus the so-called conspiracy theorists, that polarity. And then we have these religious polarities, which are more than just one against one, but a division into more sections. In order to manage it, the people who control certain communication systems have created something called the narrative. The narrative about COVID, the narrative about war, the narrative about the economy, the narrative about life, the narrative about death. All these various narratives which are specifically designed to make people into zombies, basically. To make people asleep, unconscious, and easily able to be manipulated by the narrative and its makers. And so we have another narrative. Yes. Another narrative. A narrative means like a story. And so some stories are true and some stories are lies. If you are interested in spirituality, the assumption is you're interested in truth. The assumption is also you're interested in understanding this expression, what is really going on, so that you can position yourself in regard to it, whatever it may be, in the context of this narrative. So this narrative has grown up with time, and I would say that it began at the time when the religion's scriptures were written down. So for example, in the Christian context, this happened in the 8th century, which just happens to be the time when the village I live in got made. It was decided by a bunch of people what is going to be considered true about that religion, and anything that doesn't agree with it is considered heretic, and anything heretical, it's allowed to destroy it. So thou shalt not kill the good guys, but you can kill the bad guys. So you have this division. So here we are now in 2024. We are in a world which is very much in upheaval. And the narrative is everything is okay. But the signs are everything is not okay. So you have a choice. You want to follow the narrative or you want to follow the signs. And the signs are things that you can pick up with your intuition and your kind of inner feelings. So we have, in terms of trauma, you have a conflict between what is said about what's what and what is felt about what's what. And the narrative is very, very powerful. Powerful in the sense that what I call the conditioning of people, how you are raised, to what to believe. And so this is fed into your intelligence. And so it takes precedence because it is supported by the education system, by the media, by the government, by the taxation system, by all the ideas which are contained in what I call conventional morality, what people are trained to subscribe to. And then what happens is that in the midst of all of that, you experience distress. And the narrative says, if you go along with this, you will not experience any kind of distress because this is the absolute best thing to think and feel and believe and so on. And so when you experience distress in the context of that, then you think that there's something wrong with you. And that's also part of the narrative, that if you do not go along with what the general assumptions are, it means there's something wrong with you. And if you think otherwise, then we're sure there's something wrong with you. And so it's amplified and added to, which causes a person to feel isolated. When a person feels isolated, this is very disempowering. And it allows for an environment of predator and prey to thrive very well. So what we're trying to do here is to deconstruct the narrative by different means, one of which is pointing out the faulty logic. And faulty logic can be deconstructed when you point out that the premises are not true, which means the conclusions have to be not true either. And so this is something that you do with your intellect. The narrative makes you believe your feelings and you agree to disregard your common sense in favor of these ideas that are coming through, which are designed to make you doubt your common sense. So then you can disregard it. So this is a very complicated process, a complicated narrative, but our aim is to be free. Am I right? Yeah, we want to be free, and also we want to be clear. And then the other thing is, in this, you have to ask yourself whether you are willing to take the risk to be you. Yes? Because contrary to popular understanding, when you do the right thing, it costs you far more than when you do the wrong thing. And this is something quite important to know, because when you do the right thing, it puts you on you can say the other side of the fence, where the narrative, whichever narrative it happens to be, whatever is the world in which you're operating, the narrative is that the system, if you can call it that, the system is designed to be beneficial for you. That's the narrative. Actually, the system is designed to take advantage of you. And you need to understand that. Is that okay? But you have to work with it. Because if you confront it directly, then it will destroy you, and that's very inconvenient. So in order to be able to take a risk and also operate to your convenience, you need to acquire some skills, special kind of skills, which allow you to neutralize the intended effect of the narrative, which is to disempower you. And part of the disempowerment process is to encourage you to feel guilty about who you are. Do you experience that? So if you feel guilty about who you are, it's a very important thing to deconstruct. So, first thing of all is guilt is not a feeling. Actual guilt is either you are or you aren't. And so if you are guilty, according to law, you did something that you are accused of. That's called guilty. And it can't be a feeling, you see. But there are many, many people who say, I feel guilty. You see, have you experienced feeling guilty? If you experience feeling guilty just as a feeling, then it means that the narrative has hooked into you. And this is one kind of trauma, you see, which enables you to be more strongly affected by real traumas. That means serious attacks on your person, on your sense of identity, on your value, all of these things. So these polarities that I was talking about before, the male-female, the north-south, the black-white, the left-right, all of these things are polarities that you are in the midst of, whereby you can be made to feel bad about what you are and who you are, you see. Because the polarities are, this side of the polarity is good, strong, valuable, and has a right to be, and then anything that's not is bad, weak, and should try to destroy itself. This is the narrative. And of course it's false, because all of these polarities are based upon sense perception. I've talked about sense perception a little bit. Sense perception is to consider something to be what it appears to be. Spirituality says, be careful of that one, because appearances are deceptive. Sense perception is deceptive. So the first religious tenet set up long, long ago when religions came onto the face of the earth is to say that there are two kinds of humans, males and females. Males should dominate and females should be subservient. And if you go along with that, then there will be harmony and happiness and everybody will be happily ever after. But that's a lie, because when you do that, you create an imbalance. There is an expression from I think it's the Hopi Indians, Kayaniskatsi. Have you heard that word? It means destruction through imbalance. And among the indigenous peoples, part of their ethos is to live in balance with nature, in balance with each other. And then there is harmony, then there is continuity. But the narrative, which creates these polarities, begins the process of destruction through imbalance. And this has been going on for a very, very long time. At a certain point, the imbalance becomes so strong that it tips over. An example of this is the Earth, planet Earth, which is tipped 23 degrees, but it's tipping more. So it's dangerous and wobbling. You can't feel it, but if you look at it from wherever they look at these things from, outer space somewhere, you will see that it's dangerous. And this is replicated in various different other areas that we can maybe intuitively feel, but the narrative tells us everything is fine, so disregard your intuition, disregard your feelings. In terms of some of the question answers that came yesterday, one of them was in regard to, how do I deal with a narcissistic person who wants to have a one-to-one with me? And so we know that what that means is this person is trying to destroy you. And the narrative says, allow it. And the intuition says, no, there's something wrong here. So the alternative narrative says, definitely there is something wrong here. The prevailing morality, conventional morality, is not telling you the truth. And your intuition is raising red flags, but your intelligence has been trained to override the red flags. And so when you override the red flags, then your intuition goes into alarm mode and you experience a very negative emotions like panic, sadness, disempowerment, something like this. You don't really know what to do, and so your feelings will bubble over and you will be weakened by this bubbling over. Then you say, what shall I do? And no answer comes. And so the narrative prevails, and then you get another degree of trauma. What we're doing here is developing interception weapons. I'd study weapons, having had at least one life in the military. What you have at the moment in war is you have the hypersonic weapons, which I mentioned before, 9 times the speed of sound. And the defense systems in existence are unable to intercept these weapons, which means they will reach their target. The only thing you can do is bump them, maybe. So when you bump them, then they get slightly off track for their target, rather like the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, which happened yesterday or day before. So then the narrative got interfered with. All these things, they correspond with each other. The narrative has been very successful thus far and has been able to develop an accumulation of trauma. The predator-prey system has been moving along at a good pace, but the narrative does not take into account the fact that the soul is eternal and immortal, and that everyone, which is a beautiful statement from the Bhagavad Gita, everyone who's dead will take birth, and everyone who's alive will die. So it's a very, very powerful statement, because when you die, you take with you the revenge. And when you take birth, you arrive with that system ready to operate. This creates an interference in the narrative, which, when it becomes strong enough, prevents the narrative from working properly. This means that it becomes possible for the intuition to have a little bit more power than it is supposed to have, which means that the system which is designed to make you feel isolated, disempowered, and by your emotions lose all your power and become prey, it doesn't work so well, because you begin to get little messages which say, wait a minute, don't go for the narrative because it's not true. Trust your instincts because they're reliable. Doubt, healthy doubt, very good. You begin to take a risk to say no to all these messages that say you have to feel like this, think like this, be like this, and so on. And every so often you say, you know what? Hell no. And in a way, it is your monster saying, you know what? I'm a friend. I'm not an enemy. The narrative says your monster is your enemy. Your monster is, you should feel embarrassed that you're full of monsters, you're not good, you have this wild, bad thing inside you, and you should feel bad about it and keep it down. And the monster has to be clever and say, now what am I going to do here? Because I have to get through to this dummy who's believing all this lies and get this person's attention. When you go into silence, the monster will show its teeth, and your immediate reaction is to believe the narrative. It says you have a monster inside you and you should feel bad about it, so when the monster comes up, you feel weak in front of it. Yet, there is another aspect of the self which says, if I have a really big dog or big lion or big wolf with me, that would be kind of good, because the world is dangerous, so maybe I need my monster. So then you begin to make friends with your monster. And this is what the monster wants to communicate, that yes, I'm fierce, and yes, I'm powerful and highly dangerous, and I have very big teeth, but I am part of you, I am with you, and you need me to re-establish the balance. And I think this is a phenomenon comparable to this concept of a pendulum. Pendulums swing in their own plane. That means they don't go around with the world. This is a phenomenon. So you're swinging up to this side, and then when it gets to the maximum, it starts going the other side. Maybe the narrative had not planned for that, and the pendulum starts going the other side. There's also a spiritual law which you hear about in the philosophy of karma, that whatever is done creates an equal and opposite return. So if you put it on a large scale and you say this narrative that's creating polarization goes only to a certain point, after which it has to, by these natural laws, go the other side. And that this is why it's beginning to come apart and come undone. You are in circumstances of massive change. And wherever there is massive change, there is a collapse of the arrangements. The collapse of the arrangements is very scary for people, but if you start understanding it a little more clearly, that the collapse of arrangements is very much to your advantage. I see. One of the things that people say in the narrative is the problem in the world is LGBT and whatever additional initials are required. But spirituality says, no, your aim and object is to be androgynous. Androgynous means every soul has the same number of births in male and in female forms. Exact same number. If you have 2 births, you have 1 of each. If you have 3 births, who knows? But in general, it's 50-50. 51-49 doesn't make that much difference. And so what it means is you need to denounce your affiliation to having agreed to be one or the other, and know that within you is the capability of masculine and feminine characteristics, and that is nothing to do with body parts. It's to do with who you are. And that changes your relationship with the narrative. Inside you, when your monster is coming up, it is a part of you that's saying, I will not be cowed. And the word cow means made docile, suppressed, oppressed, repressed. Whatever is in me is valid, is real. And even if it doesn't correspond with the narrative, so what? And here you're in opposition with what I call conventional morality. Because conventional morality is designed by human beings with a view to creating a harmonious society if one set of people dominates over another set of people. But it doesn't correspond to the laws of nature. It doesn't correspond to the laws of spirituality, which says balance means balance. One side heavier than the other side, that's not called balance. But it is viewed as a way of avoiding argument, avoiding people standing up for themselves, avoiding a level playing field. And maybe that might have worked a little bit for a while, perhaps. But when you reach to this maximum part of the pendulum and it starts swinging the other way, all these things break down, they don't work anymore. This is, I think, the circumstance in which we find ourselves. But what happens is, as the pendulum is swinging the other way, you're still carrying all these unresolved traumas. So unresolved traumas are in your subconscious, and they are classified by the narrative as sins, you see. So there's 2 kinds of sins. One kind of sin is you did something against somebody, and the other kind of sin is somebody did something against you. So whether you did something against someone or somebody did something against you, what happens inside you is identical. And the narrative doesn't accept that, but it is a reality that needs to be understood. we have a natural tendency to restrain ourselves from causing damage to other people, but we are conditioned not to do the other side of the equation, which is to prevent others from doing damage to us. And this is something that needs to be learned. People have no idea that when you allow any of this negativity to penetrate your being, it does the same damage to the soul as if you do damage to somebody else. You see, nobody knows this, but it's necessary to know it. Then you can come back into balance. And this whole thing is about coming back into balance and recognizing exactly what balance is. And a big part of balance is androgyny. We have to become androgynous, even though the world thinks that's like really bad. It's not, it's really good. The world has divided opportunities and education and so on according to gender bias, race bias, financial advantage bias, etc., etc. So all these biases have to be undone. And it has to begin on the very deep inside of the self. The narrative tells you to allow this to happen to you. Then you're very easy to manage. But once you get a little bit of understanding about the angle of spirituality, which corresponds to the angle of natural law, corresponds to the angle of the way the natural world is designed, and then you tell yourself, I am a being, not a body. And I am permanent, not temporary. And I am best when everything is in balance. And therefore I will begin to disallow anything that wants me to accept to be pushed further out of balance. And one of the key ingredients is this system of getting people to feel guilty. How people acquire this thought of feeling guilty is because there is a narrative means something that's spoken, right? So it is spoken through these modal verbs: should, have to, ought not, should not, etc. You spend your whole life hearing about what you should be and what you should not be. And you buy into it because when it comes to you from childhood, you have no defense against it. So it is said in a religious context, you give me somebody by the age of 7 and I have them for life, because they can indoctrinate by this narrative, which says you should be like this and you should not be like this. So if you are something that you should not be, that's when you start feeling guilty. So if you should be scientific but you are artistic, you'll feel guilty about that. And you will suppress your artistic capabilities. If you are male and you feel gentle and soft, you'll be penalized for that and you'll feel guilty about that. This narrative is very toxic for the human soul, but very convenient for whoever is planning to take advantage, whoever that might be. You have all this trauma inside you, and you need to understand that it comes from this kind of institutionalized narrative that originates in the patriarchal religions. Raj Yoga, which is what I practice, and Jacqueline and a few others around here, we study something which is described as the yoga which enables you to be a sovereign, a king or master. it is taught in the context of concepts which are designed to correspond with this, what I've been calling the narrative. The narrative that everything is one, we are all one. Have you heard about that? Mm-hmm. So we are all one what? They don't say. We are all one. One what? No idea. You know. And the idea that everything is all one thing. You know, namaste, I bow to the God within you, and you bow to the God within me, and there's only one of us, not two, you know. So it's everything all mixed up in people's heads. And then it gets to be put in Latin or Sanskrit or Greek or something that nobody understands, so that you can't figure it out and you can't argue with it. These are all tactics which need to be challenged, deconstructed, and let common sense prevail. Common sense means I'm me and you're you, and we're not the same thing, right? I'm a person, the table is an object. But then the teachings go further and they say, okay, you're a person, but the person is the spirit, not the body. The body is also an object. And objects are very temporary. They keep on appearing, disappearing, and the spirit is permanent. And the spirit is without gender, without color, without any of these things around which there can be biases established. So you start to think of yourself as that. Then the other thing it says, which is really very helpful, is there's a big game going on, which we can call the Divine Comedy, as you know from Dante. It goes from paradise to hell with limbo in between. And so that's the name of the game. We are at a point where we're coming out of the inferno and we have to become ready to go into the paradiso, the heaven. So heaven is what exactly? And hell is what exactly? We can say that heaven is where everything is balanced and hell is where everything is unbalanced. When you're going from hell to heaven, you're going from a state of imbalance to a state of balance. So when you're carrying your trauma and you are disempowered by your trauma, we can call that a state of imbalance. When your relationship with your trauma is that it doesn't drive you, but you use it to your advantage, that's more balanced. How does your trauma drive you? And where does your trauma come from? I would say that ultimately it comes from the system that is designed to create imbalance. So if you look at relationships, you'll see you have your relationships with your family, your parents, your children, your spouse. These are said by the narrative to be perfect and experienced to be imperfect. The imperfection is connected with karma. Karma is action. So when you act in accordance with the narrative, you will cause suffering to yourself and to other people. By doing this over a long, long period of time, it has arrived at different levels of war. So you have war in the family, war in the country, war in between countries, war between religions, war between genders, war between races, war between all these pairs of opposites. It's a conflicting situation. And you are in the middle of it. So definitely you're going to be impacted. So these impacts are your traumas. And so you have trauma plus a narrative that says the trauma isn't really there, or if it is, you should be happy about it. It creates confusion, and you find yourself conflicted internally between your intelligence, your conditioning, your what you've been taught to believe, and then this different voice which comes from within, which says, okay, maybe it's true, but it doesn't feel right. And then the narrative will say, well, not only it's true, but it also feels right. So if you don't feel right, it means you are not okay. It's very important for an individual to affirm, I am okay. And if the individual states to itself, I'm not okay, that causes you to be weak. So what you say to yourself is important. And so what I was trying to do with that little set of lines of streams of pure thought is the antidote to that. And it's quite difficult for people to affirm these things because it goes so much against the grain. And the grain is created by this conditioning. Again and again and again, you hear it, life after life after life. And then when you hear these other things, it feels like blasphemous. So you have a lot of resistance to it. But as you start to study it and take the risk to consider that it's probably true that I'm okay. I may be wounded, but that doesn't mean I'm not okay as a being, you see. And which means that your relationship with your wounds is different, it's very positive. I am okay, I have a wound, I can fix it, I can heal it, I can use it to add to my value, you see. So that instead of being a handicap, it becomes something that makes you more special, more capable than if you didn't have it at all. And so these are some of the building blocks that are needed to change your relationship with your trauma. So I will stop there and we will have some meditation. And in this meditation you can keep your notebooks with you because you may get a thought which you want to write down. And what I would like us to do in this meditation is to try to identify areas where you have gone along with the narrative and against your intuition or your deeper sense of self. This is where you're going to start identifying areas where the narrative has penetrated your being and created fragmentation or disintegration of the soul. First we need to understand those things and then we will repair it. Have you seen that video that went around a long time ago which came from some kind of Zen or something, a Chinese thing? A beautiful bowl shattered and was repaired by little golden things in between. So this is what we're going to do.